this one amused everyone this week. Probably apart from Elon Musk and the people who worked on them. So Starlink, our favourite satellites, there's 1,925 of these in orbit, or there were up until this week. So Starlink, if you don't know, Starlink is a global internet network communication system designed to bring broadband, high-speed internet to the entire world. Isn't that wonderful? And you pay your $400 for your flat panel dish, which apparently cats like to sit on because it's really nice and warm. And you can get enough speed to play Call of Duty in Alaska, which is fantastic. That's exactly what the internet's for. Anyway, so these 260 kilogram satellites are launched typically by the Falcons up to a nominal orbit anywhere between about 540 and 1,300 kilometers. But when they're first put into space by the said Falcon, and there's typically anywhere between about 40 and 60 of them go up in a go, they're put into a parking orbit, which is basically they have to be tested out. They put them into a relatively low orbit at around about 210 kilometers, so not very high at all. Then they're boosted up, and then they go into their nominal orbits, and different apogee perigee, but essentially they orbit the Earth and they provide broadband interconnectivity, and you can seamlessly switch between the different satellites as they go overhead, etc., etc. Anyway, so Elon and his team were warned by scientists. Now, scientists can tend to know what they're doing. That potentially these satellites at these relatively low orbits could be impacted by geomagnetic storms, basically by solar storms. The sun is slowly starting to warm up out of its hiatus, as it were. We've had many, many years of almost no sunspot activity, very little solar flare activity, etc. It seems to be picking up now. And there was a moderate, relatively low X-class, not even X-class, but relatively low storm, solar storm, that was going to be potentially impacting these satellites. Elon and his team chose to ignore this warning. 49 satellites were launched. 40 of them came out of orbit very, very soon after. Now, essentially what happened is this isn't a radiation issue. And that's a subject quite close to my heart. I'm working on a big radiation kind of mitigation system as we speak, have been for a few years. But this isn't radiation. This has nothing to do with that. This is essentially what happens is when the solar activity increases, the Earth's atmosphere kind of gets a bit bigger. This envelope around the Earth, and consequently things are even in space but at low altitude in space can suffer from atmospheric drag. Now, Elon's team had said that they were going to basically ride the wave, as it were. They were going to go sharp end first into this increased atmospheric drag, and they were going to survive. Well, they didn't. When you lose nearly 90% of the satellites that you put into orbit at a cost of millions, it's not fun. The thing is, if it was higher orbit and there was a moderate geomagnetic storm, solar storm. I keep saying that because that awful film, but essentially a big solar storm. You could go into what's called safe mode. So you could basically shut down the non-essential systems on the spacecraft, put it into what's called a safe mode. It could then potentially survive a moderate solar activity increase. It's pretty common, pretty typical for a lot of satellites. We haven't really had a big one in many, many years, but a good decade or so since we've got a really big one. The issue is that as the sun's activity increases and as Elon's cadence increases, the number of satellites he's putting into orbit all the time increases, especially, we'll go on to Starship later, but especially when Starship comes online, when we're not talking about launching maybe 40 to 60 satellites at a time, we're talking the hundreds. That thing's got 130 ton to low Earth orbit lift capability. So you could literally put up hundreds of Starlinks with one launch. And that's the whole intent of that. Now, ignoring the scientists' advice has cost him, and hopefully this is a lesson learned. But moving forward, if we were to get, like we had in September 1859, what's called a Carrington scale event, where you've got a massive solar storm that strikes the Earth. And at that point, in 1859, the Morse code telegraph systems were all knocked out. We've talked about this many times. We've had similar incidents a few decades ago where Canada's electrical system was knocked out. Something of that magnitude hasn't struck the Earth really in the space age, so to speak, where we've had tens of thousands of satellites. And when we say tens of thousands, the founder of OneWeb in the last week announced that he was going to put up 100,000 satellites just himself. How true this is, how bonkers the idea is, who knows. It's completely insane when it comes to orbital, collision avoidance and debris and all of that type of thing that we talk about many times. But Not only that, he said that these things will help clean up space. Like everyone's twitching their eyeballs and saying, "Well, how's that going to work?" And they're going to survive 10 kilometer per second impacts. And material scientists and anyone who's got even a basic knowledge of physics is again scratching their head and going, how's that going to work? It's not. It's just everybody's trying to kind of greenwash, as it were, their environmental credentials when it comes to space, because it's becoming more and more of an issue. And NASA in the last week have filed complaints into the Federal Communications Commission about Starlink, and also talked about the collision avoidance and the collision scenarios that are becoming more and more of a threat, and it's building up and up and up. On top of that, Elon's team have got the Environmental Protection Agency and various other people on them over the Boca Chica launch site, etc. So an interesting week for SpaceX, I'd say, in many fronts. And we do have a major love-hate relationship on this show with SpaceX, with Starlink being the hate side and Starship being the love side. Your thoughts on this, Terry?
Yeah, not much I can add to that, really, except that it is going to be an increasing problem. The latest forecast is that the current solar cycle will reach a maximum about 2025, but it'll still be relatively high right into 2028, which is really going to have a major effect on all these launches. And just something I also heard today, I don't have an actual figure in terms of number of satellites, but the EU apparently has just approved a budget of €6 billion to launch its own set of communication satellites. Now, as I say, I don't know how many that's going to amount to, but add that to the 100,000 and add that to the ones that Musk is already launching, plus China, plus dear knows who else. You soon not be able to sort of poke your head up above the atmosphere without getting blattered by something. It really is going to be a problem.
Yeah, and if you want a tip, and I don't normally give out financial advice tips, invest in HAPS, high altitude pseudo satellites. That's going to be the way forward, because space is just going to be a mess at the moment. It's a real shame, because the impact on science is the real. Science is the real loser here. It's already losing when it comes to light pollution and radio frequency interference, and now we're going to have regular, almost additional kind of meteor showers. The Starlink kids, or the Musk kids, as they've been affectionately labelled on Twitter. We shall see. It's a growing problem, and we'll keep on top of it, and we'll keep talking about it, and we'll keep laughing at the various fanboys and fangirls all around the world who think that he can do no wrong, and hopefully, or hopefully not, prove that we were correct, and that everyone who's been warning about the threat of this, people like Carolyn Porco, for example, extremely notable scientist, works on the Cassini mission and Voyager, etc. She's a major advocate of the kind of stance against this ever increasing threat. And I know that the Royal Astronomical Society and various other very learned societies are really picking up on this now. So let's hope that a bit of pressure goes a long way. But anyway, we shall see.